Hi, this is Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and in this presentation, I'd like to give you 12 tips for writing your first novel. I wrote my first novel and published it last September. It's called Childless, and it's about a childless child psychologist who tries to foil a U.S. government plot to have childhood labeled as a medical disorder and removed from the human genome through genetic engineering. What I'd like to do in this presentation is share some of the learnings that I gained in the process of writing this novel. My first tip is for writing your first novel is to read a lot of great fiction. To me, this is even more important than writing, believe it or not, because through reading, we internalize the voices of all these wonderful authors that are out there. And I say read great literature. Don't read bad literature. Bad literature actually does something to your inner writer's voice that is, I believe, destructive. So when I talk about great writers, I'm talking about Dostoevsky and Virginia Woolf and Tolstoy and James Joyce. And, there are a lot of wonderful authors today as well. And you should really, sit down and maybe work out a reading plan extending over several months or even years. I set out a reading plan for myself when I was 45. I'm now almost 72. And during that time, I've kind of taken an intellectual journey through the Western canon and also a lot of Eastern books too. In fact, I just finished a book called The Story of the Stone, which is one of the great novels of China during the 18th century. So fill your mind with the voices of beautiful, wonderful writers. And don't just read novels, read poetry, read plays, read essays. And these will all help you develop your acumen as a writer. Second tip is to keep a journal. Journal writing is really a staple of most writers. I've been keeping a journal since I was 29 in one form or another, and it's evolved over time. Some people think of a journal as involving just words, but you can doodle, you can draw images, you can put collage in there, anything that you want to put in your journal. You can even create a tape-recorded journal and have sound effects and music and such. The main idea is to get your ideas down and, not in a formal way. So you're worrying, oh my God, I'm writing my novel, I have to get this down. But more, it's just something that you do every day, write about what's going on during the day, write about your dreams, write about the goals that you have for writing your novel, write about some of the things that get in the way of writing your novel. Anything that fits in there. Write samples of your novel. You might find you're writing your novel in the course of keeping your journal. But, doing this on a daily or at least on a regular basis is, I think, one of the staples of being a novelist. The next tip is be unique. This is really an important one because a lot of people, when they get the idea of wanting to write a novel, they start thinking, well, to get published, I'm going to have to sound like James Patterson or, sound like this really popular author. And so you'll read this popular author and then you'll try to imitate their style. And, that's good for an exercise, but it's not what you want to be doing for your own unique novel. You want to write something that's never been written before. You see all these computer programs for, writing your novel. You just fill in the blanks, and they will actually almost write your novel for you. And you've got to steer clear of those kind of things because they really damage a person's individuality. And you need to strive to find your own voice. That's why you need to read a lot, to get lots of voices in your writer's mind so that the one voice that eventually comes out is going to be an admixture of all those great writers plus your own individual unique voice. And that's what makes your novel special. The next tip is write during your best time of day. Now, when you read about writers' habits, very often, this is what I find, you find that writers get up early, they write for most of the morning, they have lunch, maybe they write a little bit more or maybe not, maybe they write a little bit in the evening, but that's kind of their schedule, and that doesn't work for me. I'm a I'm an evening person. I go to bed at 3 or 3:30 at night, and I get up around 11:30 or 12 noon. And I do my best writing, I've found, between 3:30 p.m. and about 9:30 p.m. So those are the times in which I focus on trying to write. I don't force myself to get up early because other writers have done so. And what you have to do is figure out, when are you most alive? When is your mind really percolating? Not even necessarily with novels, but with, thinking in general. And you might find that time of day is really the best for you to work on your novel. Another tip is to find your best place to write. Writers, we think of them as writing mainly at their desks, but there are a lot of other ways to write. You can write on the floor. A lot of writers write standing up. Some writers write in bed. I know one of the great writers of the Western canon, Marcel Proust, wrote in bed. And Jack London also wrote in bed, and he had a system of pulleys, strings and pulleys, like laundry wires, strung all over his room, and he would tack up ideas for his novels on those washing lines, so to speak, and he would be able to retrieve them by pulling the string on a pulley, and that was his method for getting his writing done. So, be unique in the way that you write. Dalton Trumbo, the screenwriter, who was blacklisted during the McCarthy era, he wrote in the bathtub, and that's what worked for him. So, you might want to stand. It's actually healthier if you stand while you're working, or sitting at the desk, or try the bathtub and see if it works, but just don't get the pages wet. The next tip is to minimize what keeps you from writing. Now, there may be external things that keep you from writing. You're busy at your job, you go home, you have a family, you've got to spend time with the kids, and there's just not enough time for writing. It reminds me of Toni Morrison, the Nobel Prize winning writer. And basically, she worked all day at a publisher's. She edited textbooks. Then she'd go home and she'd take care of her kids. And then when the kids went to bed, then, late at night, she would do her writing. So it is possible, to navigate these external obstacles. But I find that most of the obstacles that writers face when they're working on their first novel tend to be internal obstacles. That certainly was true with me. One big obstacle is self-doubt, simply not believing that you can write a novel. And for years, I had that belief, and I had to struggle with it. I had to, work it out in therapy. I had to work through my dreams and look in other ways at challenging this self-doubt that I had. For some other people, it might be sort of just a general laziness that they have to overcome. But figure out what those obstacles are that keep you from writing. And then you might want to work on this in your journal. Write down some strategies for overcoming your obstacle, rearranging your time frame, creating some affirmations for your desk. I had an affirmation up on my desk for a long time while I was working on the novel saying, you can do it, you can succeed. Saying those affirmations to yourself silently can also be helpful. Or visualizing yourself succeeding can help you overcome those obstacles. Next, maximize what actually motivates you to write. What are the things that actually get you high in terms of we're not talking about drugs here, we're talking about life. What in life gets you high so that you feel great enough to want to share that with the world through your novel. And for some people, that might be walking in nature. I know Thoreau did a lot of walking in nature. In fact, a lot of great people in history have walked and gotten some of their greatest ideas while they're walking. You can also spend time reading. Again, we go back to great literature, and that may turn you on, may seed ideas that motivate you. Your dreams are a great resource for that. You may have a great story idea that comes from a dream. And I'll tell you one thing that strangely works for me is word count. You know, if you're working on Word, Microsoft Word, you can keep track of the number of words that you've written. And for me, that was always kind of a motivator. I'd have a goal, you know, I want to write, 1,500 words today, and then I'll stop. Or some days I would really be cooking and I'd, like 3,000 words in one day, my gosh. And then I keep track of the whole tally, say I'm going to write, I think Childless is actually an 88,000 word novel. It became, at one point, it was a 128,000 word novel. And my agent told me to cut it down because editors were looking for something more in the 85,000 word realm. But at any rate, this idea of writing for words may seem rather trivial or a little bit too linear or quantitative, but it can be a really interesting, motivating factor to help you in your writing. Another tip is to get people support. Now this one doesn't apply as much to me. I'm an introvert and I do most of my writing and my thinking about my writing on my own. In fact, while I was writing the novel, I think only about 5 people read it. And I wasn't looking for people to give me, feedback or support. But I think for a lot of people, especially if you're an extrovert, getting out there with other people and sharing your writing, or at least sharing that you're writing, can be an important part of the process. You might want to go to writers' conferences. I actually did that for 3 years, even before I started the novel. I went to the Santa Barbara Writers' Conference in Santa Barbara, or actually they have it in Montecito, I think. And it was a terrific conference. Ray Bradbury always gave the opening keynote. They had writers like William Styron. And I think Jack Canfield even talked about his Chicken Soup for the Soul books. You get all kinds of writers there, and you run into people who are on the same journey as you are, and that can be really helpful. And you might also go to writers' workshops or ongoing writers groups in your local community. If you look, go to your library, for example, there might be a notice about writers groups that are meeting. Or you might just want to find a friend or a group of friends that you can call upon if and when you need help or you need inspiration or you want to read, some of what you've written and get some honest feedback about it. That's really important for a lot of people. Another tip that is kind of related to people support is to listen and watch and find out about published authors and what they do to do what they do. There's a great program online called Masterclass that provides classes by some of the greatest experts in their field. It's rather expensive. It's $180 a year, but you can watch any and all of the different classes that they have, from politicians to actors, entertainers, athletes, and they have a lot of great writers talking about their craft as well. I was particularly fascinated by James Patterson, even though I don't read his books, but he had a fascinating style of talking about what he does. He outlines his novels in detail, and then he fills it in later or has one of his collaborators fill it in. Judy Blume was terrific, very sensitive. She would sometimes start crying when she got to a particular touching moment in one of her novels. Margaret Atwood had a wonderful sense of humor. You really learn a lot about their lives as writers, and that can be really helpful. But you don't have to go to master class. You can go onto YouTube and simply put in the name of a favorite author, and oftentimes there'll be a YouTube about they're being interviewed where they talk about how they write and so forth. So there's a lot out there, and I think it's really helpful. You get inspired. You see that these writers have done it. They have done what you want to do, and so they can draw you toward your goal simply by being in their presence, so to speak. And it doesn't hurt to, if an author is in a town for a lecture or a book signing or whatever, to attend those as well, and maybe have the opportunity to have a book signed by one of the authors that you really esteem. The next tip is to write for the right reasons. Now, this is an important but subtle one. A lot of people, want to write. You ask them why they want to write, and they'll say, "Well, I want to be famous. I want to win the Pulitzer Prize. I want to make a lot of money. I want girls to like me or boys to like me." And these are kind of external goals or outcomes, and I think you need to be a little careful of doing it just for those kind of external reasons. And I'll tell you why. There's a kind of a logic behind this. If you only write for external success and you end up succeeding, that's a win. But if you don't succeed, that's a loss. You're a failure. You didn't do what you set out to do. So I call that a win-lose situation. On the other hand, if you write for inner satisfaction, for wanting to say something important about life, about people, for the satisfaction of being creative, of creating something that didn't exist before, or any of a number of other inner intrinsic motivational factors, if you succeed externally, that's great. That's a win for you. That may not be the reason you got into it, but it's nice to have. You can't really say that, getting the Pulitzer Prize or, getting an advance of $300,000 for your first novel would be something that you wouldn't want. So that's a win. The thing is, if you don't succeed, let's say your book sales are low, let's say there isn't any critical acclaim for your novel, that's, not a problem, because you still have the inner satisfaction of having written for yourself and for, the carrying on of important ideas. So it's a win-win situation. If you succeed externally, you win. And if you don't succeed externally, you still win from that internal satisfaction. So that's why it's much better to rely on your own inner motivation to write rather than look for some of these, awards or, external reinforcers outside of yourself. The next point is what I call revise, revise, revise. Some people say, you should write the first draft out and edit later. And maybe that works for you. That's fine. Jack Kerouac wrote On the Road. The legend has it that he wrote On the Road over a period of 3 weeks, high on speed, putting a roll of paper in his typewriter and simply just typing, and letting the roll spin out. Okay, that works for some people. I find that editing is part of the process. Writing and editing are two sides of the same coin. When I write, I will write something, and I will, maybe after a paragraph, I'll look back at it and try to make it better. At the end of the day, I almost invariably read what I've written during the day and try to, clean it up If it doesn't flow, try to make it flow. And you see this crumpled piece of paper, you might wonder what that is. That's kind of a metaphor for what I do when I'm writing. Because when I write, and I go back and I start to edit and make it better, I feel like I'm going over a crumpled piece of paper, smoothing it out. I'm smoothing out the bumps and the pits and the typos and that kind of thing. And I do that frequently. I mean, I can't tell you how many thousands of revisions my first novel went through because it was all part of the process. So consider that as something that you regularly do. And you know, there's no end to it. After my 1000th revision, and I was going over it to have it, typeset, I found that still there were typos, there were things I wanted to say better. It's a never-ending process. Just as long as you feel that way and believe that, you're going to be a better writer for that. And finally, keep your eyes on the prize. There's a lot of things that can get in the way of your writing your novel. Some people take years and years to write their novel. Goethe, the German author, took, I think, 40 years to write his great, it's a kind of a poem, play, novel sort of thing, Faust. And so, there's no time limit here, although, you may want to crank out one just to say that you've done it. But this is a special process. When you are creating a novel, you are making something happen that never happened before. And that is an amazing thing. It's really magic if you want to think about it in that way. And so, one of the things that's really helped me, because for years I didn't believe that I could write a novel, but then I started to get these gleaming senses, even a feeling in my belly. I remember I was in a bathtub once and I got this feeling in my belly that said, you could write a novel. And I began to develop this sense of certainty. And I had almost an obsession. I think that to some extent it almost takes an obsession to take on something as complex as a novel, that you need to, keep that goal always in sight at some level, no matter what's going on, no matter what the self-doubt or what the obstacles are, periods of stagnation where you're not writing at all, things like that will happen. But as long as you keep your eyes on the prize and keep that sense of the novel, of what you want to achieve in your mind, in your heart, in your soul, you're going to achieve it. So back to my novel just for a minute. Childless is available on Amazon as a Kindle. You can read it on a tablet. You can read it on your iPhone as an EPUB. And you can also get it as a paperback book. So look for it. And in the meantime, understand that your dreams can be real if you make them so, if you work, if you keep your head in the clouds and your feet, sunk in the earth, you will find what's coming to you is beautiful and perhaps unthought of, something new, something beautiful that you've created. Thanks very much.